part better than the lead. That's more of a... And in this one, we're going to title it, Saul Revealed to Reign. I had a hard time with this because I kept wanting to really put their chosen to reign. But everywhere I looked, and I may repeat this, I never could find anywhere where Saul was chosen to be king by God. You look. You see what you can find. But I'll save that and make comment a little bit later. Of course, our overall outline you see here. Samuel, we've already looked at all of the chapters dealing with him, chapters 1 through 8. Now we're starting on 9 through 15, dealing with Saul. And then we'll deal with David from chapter 16 to verse 31. I've also got a little chart. If you like a little bit more visual of that particular idea, I'm going to give you a little tiny chart. That's a little tiny chart, isn't it? Might help if I made it a little bit bigger. How about that? You see a little bit? I told you I was going to give you a little tiny chart, but I made it a little bit bigger so that you can kind of see, again, and even that, it's not big enough. This is, I believe his name is Charles Jensen. May be the wrong first name. But he's the one that built this, and you can find it and see. I like graphics. I like charts. I like to be able to see, even when I look at the prophets, I like to see all the prophets and the age and where they overlapped, and I like to see which ones were contemporary of one another. It just helps me a little bit to visualize some things. So this might help. Now, the other thing that I think might help tonight, if you remember last week, I think we had 9, wasn't it, points in our outline. I'm going to make it real simple. You're going to have 2 points. Saul's introduction to us, verses 1 through 14, and then Saul's introduction to Samuel, verses 15 through 27. Now, under that, I have 52 subpoints. No, I'm kidding. I don't have that many, but almost every verse is a subpoint, but I'm not going to give you the subpoints. I'm just going to give you the verse that's here. When I'm talking about Saul's introduction to us, I'm talking about how you haven't heard anything about him, and this is the first time you're going to hear about Saul. And so it is his introduction, but the biggest thing is you're going to see, again, God's providential hand. Man, if you can't see God's providential hand in this story, then come see me. And let's just sit down and read this together again, because it's right there. I mean, from straying animals to the timing of the search, the location of his travels, to the servant that's even chosen for Saul to travel with him. This chapter reveals God's chosen, I'm talking about Samuel, being led to anoint the people's choice as king of Israel. God gave us liberty to choose. You and I have free will to act according to our nature. But you know, when I say you have free will, you have the free choice to be able to also to learn firsthand about the laws of the harvest. Do you know what I'm talking about when I say the laws of the harvest? If you sow to the flesh, of the flesh you'll reap corruption. You're free to make that choice. I don't want to make that choice. I don't know about you. I'd rather sow to the Spirit where I'm going to reap everlasting life. I want you to notice when we look at this that there's a focus that's given to the image of Saul. When you start looking at this story, you're going to notice the animals liberating themselves. And then who is sent to find them? The servant that Saul brought with him, the location, the concern even for communication and his time of being gone. And their time of their discussion. God's hand is all over this story. He is revealing us to us in this story too. When we remove God from the place of the sovereign king and place ourselves above him, we are, in this story, Israel. God didn't forsake Israel, but they reaped what they sowed. We are his chosen, but oftentimes we have to learn the law of the harvest. Our choices make a difference. And that is not the only lesson that we can learn from this story, so let's get started. First of all, as I said, looking just at Saul's introduction to us. This is Saul's introduction to the reader. This is the history of the very first king of Israel. And it begins by revealing Israel's perception of Saul and even Saul's perception of himself. You'll see that a little bit later in verse 21, where even Samuel, much later, says, you know, when you were first king, you had a little evaluation of yourself. And that's exactly what he gives you in this chapter. His heritage, there was a man of Benjamin, whose name was Kish. That's Saul's father. The son of Abiel, the son of Zeor, the son of Becheroth, the son of Aphiah, a Benjamite, a mighty man of power. Now, I realize as I started writing a lot on this that I think we could turn this into 2 or 3 sermons, matter of fact. But I'll just comment that though he came from a small tribe, his father apparently was a man of renown. It does not explain to us what is meant by a mighty man of power. Was it a power that involved his strength, muscles, strength of character? Was it strength of influence? Or was it his wealth? Was it strength of leadership or strength of authority? Maybe it was all of those things. No doubt he had wealth, for we see it just simply in the fact that he had the animals that he did, and he had servants. You had to have money to have either. Then we see his looks. Verse 2. Click, click. He had a son whose name was Saul, a choice young man, and a goodly. And there was not among the children of Israel a goodlier person than he. From his shoulders and upward, he was higher than any of the people. Isn't it interesting that everything noted here is about his physical appearance? Well, that's exactly what Israel wanted. They wanted what they saw in other nations. They wanted to be like them. I wonder if they had some pretty rugged-looking judges that weren't dressed real well. They were out there farming or doing whatever they were doing, and they would come up, but no, they wanted something and someone more regal. Saul, by this time, some will say that he was already well into adulthood. He was married and probably already had Jonathan, but he was certainly a good-looking man. He was a stately-looking man. A lot of people are good-looking, but not like this guy. He says when he had the appearance of being a king. That's what they wanted. He was fit, and he was fit the part of a royal. He fit that way more than anyone. He stood head and shoulders above everyone, and a lot will comment that this is what was important to them about their kings, that they were bigger, taller, and more handsome or rugged-looking than anyone. Us little guys, the ruddy little guys like David, didn't have a chance. They wouldn't have with the people. Again, I looked through the passages in our study and included other passages, and I did not find a single verse which said that God chose Saul because he was a man after his own heart. Now, again, if you find one, you share it with me, please. That's not a challenge. I looked. You can find verses that will sound like he's God's choice, but I'll explain a little bit later. You do read about David and even Solomon. You will find a verse in particular where it says that God provided me a king. 1 Samuel chapter 16 and verse 1, the Lord said unto Samuel, How long wilt thou mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill thine horn with oil, and go, and I will send thee to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have, notice this, provided me a king. You provided you a king, now I'm going to provide me a king. See, I believe that Saul was Israel's choice to be the people's king. But David was chosen to be God's king over Israel. Doesn't mean that God wouldn't use Saul. Didn't mean that God wouldn't bless Saul. But he chose him because the people cried for a king. And listen, make sure you understand this. Sometimes you can cry, you can beg, and you can plead for something you shouldn't have. And God will give it to you. But that doesn't mean you're done in after God gives it to you, because God still blessed Israel. God still used the king to bless them. But what we see too, let's keep on going, verse 3, because now we're going to start this adventure. And again, here we have the asses of Kish, Saul's father, were lost, donkeys. And Kish said to Saul, Take now one of the servants with thee, and arise and go seek the asses. Now, if their value was not very high, I don't think that Kish would have sent his son to look after him and look for him. But he did. He sent him. He sent somebody he could trust, somebody that would be thorough in their search and bring them back if they found him. It isn't by chance, I don't believe, that these animals got loose. Now, some animals will get loose from the corral or from the barn, and they don't stray very far. These not only got loose, they got lost. I don't think that was by chance. It isn't by chance that the instructions to go find him were given to Saul, and that he was told to take a servant with him, because that servant's going to play a pivotal role in the story. In fact, he knew something that Samuel didn't know, and he had some coins at the end that Samuel didn't have. Then we find out about how hard he searched, verse 4. His search, he passed through Mount Ephraim and passed to the land of Salishah, but they found them not. Then they passed to the land of Shalem, and they were not there, and he passed through the land of the Benjamites, but they found them not. Now, a lot of people will argue about where they went and how the coordinates were, but at least they figure out that they searched the mountainous areas, and then they searched the other areas, and they probably, when that first area that they went through, that covered about a minimum of 7 miles to the northwest. Then they went about 8 miles to the west, and then another 16 miles to the south. Now that's looking for some donkeys. That's some travel. Then, what do we find? They're tired. They've been gone a while. They come to a city called Zuph. And when they were come to the land of Zuph, Saul said to his servant that was with him, Come and let us return. Let's go home. We're done looking. Lest my father leave caring for the asses and take thought for us. Now, after a while, you start figuring out that the search for these animals is not as valuable as the men who were searching for them. And so Saul's he's aware of that. He has compassion, he has concern. And so his concern for his father and how long they've been gone, and so he's ready to go home. He's ready to count their losses. It's interesting to know that if he would have gone home at this very time, he would have found that all the donkeys were already there. But he didn't know that. Nobody gave him a cell phone to take with him. There was no text, no emails, no smoke signals, nothing at all. So what do we find? Verse 6. And he said unto him, Behold now, there is in this city, this is the servant, a man of God. He is an honorable man, and all that he saith surely cometh to pass. Now, remember what we learned about Saul or Samuel? None of his words ever fell to the ground. None of his prophecies, none of those things that he said that would happen failed to happen. So here's what he says. He says, let us go thither. Peradventure, he can show us our way that we should go. Well, then what do we find? That sounds like a great idea. Then Saul said to the servant, but behold, if we go, what shall we bring the man? For the bread is spent in our vessels. This is another point you need to pay attention to. They're out of supplies. There's no present to bring the man. What have we? And the servant answered Saul again and said, behold, I have here at hand the 4th part of a shekel of silver. That will I give to the man of God to tell us our way. Whoop, whoop. That's not a very good tip. That's pretty poor. When we look at this, I mean, imagine going up in the first place and asking the prophet of God, would you help me find my donkeys? Not a very high opinion of the prophet of God. It also makes it appear that Saul did not know anything about Samuel. Excuse me, but wasn't Samuel a judge over Israel for 40 years, and you've known nothing about Samuel? You didn't go, oh yeah, I heard about that guy. What were you raised in a vacuum? Indeed, I think he was. I don't think he was taught a lot. I don't think that he had any idea who Samuel was. But he's going to soon find out. That's why I said this is Saul's introduction to us, but pretty soon he's going to be introduced to Samuel. So we see a little bit of that hesitation of what's going on. We see the servant's donation, and then we get a little bit of a history lesson. Quite interesting, verse 9, before time in Israel. This is, you can see it's a parenthetical statement. So we're going to just throw this in as a little history lesson for you. Before time in Israel, when a man went to inquire of God, thus he spake, come and let us go to the seer. For he that is now called a prophet was before time called a seer. Do you know that this is the very first time that the word seer is used in the Old Testament? So we're getting a history lesson. We didn't know that before, but that's what they called him beforehand. Then Saul said to his servant, well said, come, let us go. So they went unto the city where the man of God was. Now they encounter again, something else takes place, maidens. And as they went up the hill to the city, they found young maidens going out to draw water, and said to them, is the seer here? Well, the maidens give them some information, a little bit of hurry as well. They answered and said, he is. Behold, he is before you. It's kind of like he's right down the street, right where you're at, just a little further down. But they tell him, make haste now, for he has come today to the city. For there is a sacrifice of the people today in the high place. This is all just, again, by chance. All of this stuff is prearranged by God. But again, as it's prearranged by God, everybody has their own will. Everybody can do what they want. Israel has the time. The timing is perfect according to God's plan, isn't it? They say, yeah, but they say, hurry up, get down there before he sits down. Verse 13. As soon as you come into the city, you shall straightway find him before he go up to the high place to eat. Go right up to him, for the people will not eat until he come, because he doth bless the sacrifice. And afterwards, notice this, they that be bidden. Now, everybody's coming to the sacrifice, but this little note here has to do with a special dinner that's provided by the priest himself, and you'll see that. So they say, now therefore, get you up, make haste, get going, for about this time ye shall find him. And again, remember that Saul and the servant have no bread, and they have no money that they're going to be able to spend, because what little they do have, they're going to try to give it to the prophet. But here we see there's something very interesting, and that's the providential meeting. Verse 14, and they went up into the city, and when they were coming to the city, behold, Samuel came out against them for to go up to the high place. Just so happens Samuel came out the door. Just so happens. Again, God, can you not see God's providential hand through this whole story? Just as he's going out the door, here's Saul. And look what happens after that. Again, there's just too many coincidences to believe they are just coincidences. Then we see the whisper of God. In verse 15 through 27, this is Saul's introduction to Samuel. It's almost as if you get the picture that God kind of leans down and whispers in his ear, don't you? Now the Lord told Samuel in his ear the day before Saul came. Then don't you kind of get that little picture? God's just giving him a little word. What does he tell him? He says, tomorrow about this time I will send thee a man out of the land of Benjamin, and thou shalt anoint him to be captain over my people Israel, that he may save my people out of the hand of the Philistines. For I have looked upon my people, because their cry has come unto me. It wasn't because God chose him because he would be a good king or because they needed a king. He chose them because they wanted to be like all the other nations. They wanted to be and have the appearance of being royals, important. So God's going to use him, but it's because of their cry. Jehovah whispered in the ear of Samuel. The wording to me is not what a lot of people claim when they say that cry has come unto me. I believe this wasn't grace or mercy. I believe giving them Saul was a rebuke. You can think what you will. You have that liberty. Saul's arrival in verse 17, and when Samuel saw Saul, try to say that 7 times real fast. The Lord said unto him, behold, the man whom I spake of to thee, this same shall reign over my people. This is the confirmation that God will anoint this man. The man that epitomizes the choice of Israel. He is the personification of what they wanted in a man to rule over them. In verse 18, then Saul drew near to Samuel in the gate and said, tell me, I pray thee, where the seer's house is. And Samuel answered Saul and said, I am the seer. Now notice what he does. No more discussion. He just says, go up before me unto the high place, for ye shall eat with me today. And I think his belly right then started thanking him. Because remember, he's got no bread. They have no money to buy food. They've been traveling and walking. But he says, you're going to go with me, and you're going to eat with me today, and tomorrow I will let thee go, and I will tell thee all that is in thine heart. Saul doesn't ask him a question yet. Saul doesn't ask him where the donkeys are. Watch what happens. Keep on going. Verse 20, when we see this. And as for thine asses that were lost, he didn't tell him this 3 days ago. Set not thy mind on them, for they are found. And on whom is all thy desire, on whom is all the desire of Israel? Is it not on thee and on all thy father's house? Now that verse is a strange combination of facts. This is a very convincing conversation. Immediately, Saul tells him about things that he's never mentioned, things that are on his mind. But then that last sentence, or the two really, and on whom is all the desire of Israel. You know what he's saying here? Who does Israel want to be king? It's on you. They want you. Now, all Israel doesn't yet know him, but as he appears, they will want him. He is exactly, that's why I said a while ago, he's the epitome, he's the personification of Israel's choice. They're going to see him and they're going to know that's the guy. That's who we want. Because he looks like a king. He talks like a king. He acts like a king. It was a unanimous decision of Israel, and it will be. Verse 21, and Saul answered and said, this is where I told you a while ago, when you were little in your own eyes. Look at the humility. Saul answered and said, am I not a Benjamite, of the smallest of the tribes of Israel, and my family the least of all the families? Didn't we just read how his father was a mighty man? Yet he doesn't say any of that. We're the smallest tribe, my family the least of the families of the tribe of Benjamin. Why do you speak thou so to me? Verse 22, and Samuel took Saul and his servant and brought them into the parlor and made them sit in the chiefest place among them that were bidden, which were about 30 persons. Remember what I said a while ago about the maidens? They said, and to those that are bidden, there you go. Those 30 pieces or people were bidden. Those people were sat according to their importance. And who got sat right in the chief spot? Saul and his servant. Saul, not only that, but notice verse 23 what happens. And Samuel said unto the cook, bring the portion which I gave thee, of which I said unto thee, set it by thee. In other words, before this even happened, Samuel had given instructions to the cook, but we're going to have a special guest. You set this aside just for him. Verse 24, and the cook took up the shoulder, that which was upon it, and set it before Saul. The prime piece of meat was also given to Saul. And Samuel said, behold, that which is left, set it before thee and eat, for unto this time hath it been kept for thee, since I said, I have invited the people. So Saul did eat with Samuel that day. I got to go quickly to finish this off. And when they were come down from the high place into the city, Samuel communed with Saul upon the top of the house. And they arose early, and it came to pass about the spring of the day that Samuel called Saul to the top of the house, saying, up, that I may send thee away. And Saul arose, and they went out, both of them, he and Samuel, abroad. And as they were going down to the end of the city, got to the edge of it, Samuel said to Saul, bid the servant pass on before us. And he passed on. In other words, I got something private to tell you. I want you to stand still a while that I may show thee the word of God. Now I have to cheat and go into the 10th chapter and the first verse because I want you to read it together. Remember, chapters and verses are man-made. The division should not be here because it says as they were going to the end, he said, send the servant, let him go on. And he passed on, but stand thou still a while that I may show thee the word of God. Then Samuel took a vial of oil and poured it upon his head and kissed him and said, is it not because the Lord hath anointed thee? Not chosen. Just want to make sure you see that. Not chosen, but it is the Lord anointed thee to be captain over his inheritance. Next week, we'll get into a little bit more of the details of Saul. He was revealed by God to reign. I hope that's been a blessing to you tonight. I know that tonight is